There we go.
It wouldn't be a true COVID event if we didn't have a few moments of uh, tech problems on the way.
Yeah, I had the link in my appointment, but it might not have been the right link. I could see you and see that you were talking, but that was it. Anyway.
So yeah, thank you for joining us this evening. I mentioned earlier to folks, this is part of our year-long speaker series on the lake, and we're excited to continue this, having you join us tonight to give us with your background and expertise. So with that, I'll just let you get started.
Great. Well, thanks, Joshua, and thanks, everybody. I'm going to share a screen with you. I hope it turns out okay. All right. Well, good evening, everybody. My name is Cam, and I've spoken to SEA on a couple of occasions, but one time was in somebody's home, and then another time was I think at an apartment somewhere. So it feels weird to be in Southeast Evanston with you all right now, but not to be with you in person. Even if we wanted to be together in person, I'm pretty sure half of us would get stuck in the snow. Anyway, thanks for the invitation to come chat tonight a little bit about what's going on with Lake Michigan and the other Great Lakes, climate change, lake levels, the Chicago River system, basically all things water in our community. But first I wanted to flash this old postcard up on the screen, and I wanted to see if anybody is enough of a historian to guess which beach this is a postcard of. And I'm going to tell you, I don't know the answer, which is part of why I'm asking you all the question. And if you don't know, or better yet, maybe Joshua will just use the chat function to see whose guesses are what as we get to the end of the presentation. How does that sound? Good.
Sounds great.
Let's dive in. These are the things we'll chat a little bit about tonight. I don't really have prepared remarks or anything like that. I'm just gonna talk. And really looking forward to questions and answers. Here's your second trivia question of the night. Can somebody name that year? And it's a slight trick question. Anybody want to take a shot? Well, I'm not seeing any answers, so I'll just go ahead and I'll just let you know. But basically, the one on the right is from the mid 1980s. The one on the left is from last year. These were taken over on the Michigan side of Lake Michigan. And part of why I thought I would use them as a little bit of a show and tell or a centerpiece for the discussion is it just goes to show you how little we have learned over the past 35 or so years in terms of building too closely to the lakefront. So one of the things that's really important is build backs. Those are building back away from the lake, because the lake goes up and the lake goes down, the lake goes in and the lake goes out. So making sure that we don't see the lake as static and don't try to control it, because you really can't, is part of the name of the game when it comes to dealing with lake levels. One of the number one questions that I get is, what can we do about lake levels? And my answer to that is always, Well, the number one thing we can do to control lake levels is to control the weather. And I only say that half facetiously because, of course, we can't control the weather, but B, that's pretty much what it would take in order to control lake levels. We can't send more water out of the Chicago River diversion. Even if we did, it really would not make an appreciable difference. It really is weather related. It has to do with evaporation and precipitation rates. And we're gonna talk about that right now. And I'm gonna show you in very graphic terms what that looks like. So I'm gonna show you 3 hydrographs. This first one is from Lake Superior. Now this was from October of the fall, but I kept it and didn't update it for a reason. Can you all see where my cursor is? Can anybody just respond very quickly?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, great. So what you see here in this hydrograph from Lake Superior is a relatively normal cycle. Starting around November, December, lake levels go down. And then around March, they start to go back up again. And then in November, December, or October, go down again. And then in the spring, up again, fall down again. That is a relatively normal hydrograph for our lake level cycles. And there's a reason for this. And that is that in the springtime, we have a lot of snow melt. We have our spring rains. And knowing that there's a lag time in terms of how quickly the lakes respond, what you see starting around March is you start to see lake levels go up as a result of that snow melt, the rivers and tributary swelling, and as a result of spring rains. And then as we get to the summertime and into the fall, we typically are in our drier season. A lot of you around Evanston, come to water your lawns in July and August, and that's because it doesn't typically rain a lot then. And so the lakes start to show that around the fall. That lack of rain in our hot, dry summer months starts to lead to a decline in lake levels until we repeat the cycle all over again in the springtime. So that's Lake Superior. This is Lake Erie. It's an even more pronounced cycle. Again, same thing. Spring, we see lake levels go up because of that precipitation and that snow melt. And then as we get into the drier summer months and head into the fall, more water leaves the system and lake levels go back down, only to have that cycle repeat itself seasonally. Now, next trivia question. What 2 Great Lakes are actually one lake? Anybody want to type that in? Anybody want to speak up? Don't be shy. Come on. I know somebody can do it out there. What 2 Great Lakes are actually one Great Lake? There we go. I see a few answers. Hi, Emily. Michigan Superior is one guess. Ted Glosso, Huron and Michigan. Catherine, Superior and Huron, all very good guesses. Ted, you win the award. Huron and Michigan, Lakes Huron and Michigan are actually the same lake hydrologically. For those of you who have driven over the Mackinac Bridge, which is over the Straits of Mackinac, that's what connects the 2 lakes, Lakes Huron and Michigan, basically making them hydrologically speaking one lake. And you're about to see that in real life here, because when the Corps of Engineers, who these hydrographs come from, puts out a hydrograph for Lake Michigan, they don't actually just do it for Lake Michigan. They do it for Lakes Michigan and Huron because they both behave the same way, because hydrologically they're the same lake. Okay, here's where we get to the really fun part when it comes to hydrographs. you see the typical cycle here. So fall of 2018, lake levels going down, in the spring of 2019 going back up and up and up. And then what happens? Basically, Lakes Michigan and Huron stay flat. That's crazy. Why is that? Some of you may remember, not this past year, but the year before that, we got to summertime of 2019 and it continued to rain in July, and it continued to rain in August and September and October. And throughout the fall, where we typically see precipitation dropping off, and we see the warm lake temperatures and cool air temperatures come together to create evaporation, that didn't happen in 2019. So as a result, Lake Michigan and Lake Huron, but let's face it, Lake Michigan is the far better lake because we live near it. When we got to spring of last year, instead of lake levels starting down around here as they might normally do, they actually started not far off from where they left off the previous spring. And then they went back up again because we had a very wet spring. And so when people ask, why do we have these high lake levels? The hydrograph tells it all. And it's basically because of what I call the two shuns: precipitation and evaporation. We've had the 3 wettest months of May on record in the Chicago region over the past 3 years. The record high month of May was in 2018, broken by the month of May in 2019. And then again, last year, the month of May, we had 8 plus almost 9 inches of rain in the month of May in our area. And so that led to a much wetter spring with lake levels going even further up. Now, what are your impressions about the summer that we just had, the summer of 2020? I'm going to look at the chat box and see what people want to say about that. Did we have a relatively wet summer, or did we have a relatively dry summer this past summer? Just want you to know I'm a former law professor and I can wait for answers for a very long time. Ted, dry, question mark. Again, you're right. Ted, I just want you to know that when you get 2 or more answers correct, the Southeast Evanston Association will pay you a $1 million award. So SEA owes you $1 million for your correct trivia answers. Way to go. SEA, that's not going to be a problem, right?
Not a problem at all.
Okay.
It comes out of your campaign budget.
You'll be waiting a long time. Anyway, good answers, good participation. Thank you guys for weighing in. It makes it a lot more fun. But yes, we had a relatively normal summer last summer where it really didn't rain that much in July. It really didn't rain that much in August. In fact, some of you may remember, some of you were in Evanston on August 10th of last summer. And I'm wondering if any of you remember what happened on August 10th of 2020. I'll spare you the trivia question and just answer the question straight out. Basically, you may remember there was a terrific storm that passed through near Evanston, not actually through Evanston. It took down trees along Dempster Street, created a little bit of havoc. That was all related to what's called a derecho, which is a little bit like a tornado that originated out of Iowa and then moved eastbound south of Lake Michigan through Indiana. but we still got the collateral damage from that, even though the derecho did not pass through our area. That derecho originated in Iowa as a result of drought conditions. So yeah, we had a relatively normal, dryish summer last year here in this region, whereas not far away, there were drought conditions that actually led to that derecho that some of you may remember from August 10th of last year. All of that is a roundabout way of saying, because of that dry-ish summer or relatively normal summer that we had in 2020, you start to see forecasts that get us the lake levels down to much more normal cycles. I won't say normal lake levels. I'm not even sure what normal is anymore, but normal cycles in that fall, winter lake levels starting to head back down again. The big question is, what is all of this snow going to mean for the lake levels? Does the snow that we're having foreshadow a wet spring? And will we continue to see record-breaking months of May with rain? Does the snow turn into rain? We don't know, because we can't predict the future. But if anybody asks you at a cocktail party or a PTA meeting, you know, are we going to see the lake levels keep going up? Nobody can answer that question, but you can look at the dynamics that can help you answer the question. And some of the dynamics are we going to continue to see a lot of snow? Are we going to see that snow translate into similar kinds of rainstorms as we head into spring? And that will help us see whether or not we may wind up having higher lake levels going into 2021. So I mentioned the two shuns before. There's precipitation and then there's evaporation. I think we're all getting a very hands-on look at what precipitation looks like. In the wintertime, we all know what it looks like in the springtime. One of the things that we've had the past couple of years that we have not had so far this winter is a flash thaw, where the ground is frozen and we have snow on the ground, and then all of a sudden we have warm atmospheric temperatures and it rains. When that happens, the rain doesn't have anywhere to go but into our drainage system. It in drier weather, or if we don't have snow, or if the snow if the ground is not frozen, in an ideal world, that rain gets soaked up into the ground. But when the ground is frozen, a drop of water from the sky just runs right off your lawn into one of the gutters, into the sewer system, and can really pummel the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District's sewage system. So we know what precipitation looks like. What does evaporation look like? Has anybody ever seen evaporation before? I'm going to show you a picture that will help you see what evaporation looks like. This is a picture I took on October 2nd off of Clark Square. This, when I was dropping my son off at swimming at ETHS. He has to be at swimming at 6 o'clock, so about 6:15 a.m. Here's the sun coming up over the lake to the east, and coming down from Chicago Avenue on Kedzie Street, saw in the distance what it was clearly an illusion, but what looked like a mountain range. When you get closer to the lake, this is what it is. This is what millions of gallons of water leaving the system looks like through evaporation. You have a lake that is coming off of a warm summer, even a hot summer. So the lake temperatures are relatively warm. You have an atmosphere that's cooling. So just like dropping some water into a frying pan and seeing the steam come off of the frying pan. That's exactly what is happening here. And that's exactly what happens in the fall, which is why in that hydrograph, if you still have it in the back of your mind, you start to see lake levels taper off in the fall and start to drop down. It's because of this dynamic: warmer water temperatures, cooler air temperatures. That means all millions of gallons of water are moving from the lake up into the sky. And typically the wind patterns in our area are from west to east. So these clouds and this evaporation essentially gets pushed over into Michigan and away from Illinois, which is part of why the lower peninsula of Michigan in a lot of places is often as overcast as just about any place in the United States. Anyway, this is what evaporation looks like. If ever anybody asks you, have you ever seen evaporation? You can now say, yes, I have. And this is what it looks like outside of our front doors. You know, these lake levels, I just want to make a point here. The lake levels are not just important because they wash away our beaches or they threaten property along the coast. They also present a safety issue as well. And this research from the Surf Rescue Project typifies some of the challenges I think we have in our particular region. You know, those of us who live in Evanston know, unfortunately, we have a drowning off of one of our beaches once a year or so. Those are typically the result of rip currents, not rip tides, because we don't have tides in the Great Lakes, but currents that are created as a result of big waves and the jetties that we have that stick out perpendicularly into the lake. So we do have a lot of safety things that we need to be thinking about when it comes to lake levels and lake dynamics. A lot of this is a function of us living in a very populous area on Lake Michigan. We've got Chicago, we've got Milwaukee, and so on. And so if this is broken down on a per capita basis, my guess is we would not see Lake Michigan showing the way it does on this graph. So that's a little bit about lake levels. I know we care about that here in Evanston, and we want to know why they happen, why they go up and down, and what can be done about it. The short answer is trying to build away from the lake, trying to create a safe buffer along our coasts is really important. Let me turn now in the presentation to environmental quality. I've talked a little bit about water quantity. Let's talk about water quality. We have around the Great Lakes something that we're really fortunate to have, which is called the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. And this has been an investment that the federal government has made in the recovery of the Great Lakes system now for 11 years. When I was with the Obama administration, we proposed this. It was funded by a bipartisan Congress. We put out the action plan in February of 2010. It's been updated in 5-year increments, but it has essentially stayed the same in terms of the problems that it is intended to address, and it's making marked progress. One of the things that the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative does is it invests in the cleanup of toxic hotspots called areas of concern. The area of concern that some of you may be most familiar with without even knowing it is Waukegan Harbor. Waukegan Harbor used to be comprised of literally half of its sediments were PCBs. 500,000 parts per million of the sediment in Waukegan Harbor used to be PCBs. That cleanup has now been completed. It's been completed for moving up on a decade, and it has done, it's made remarkable progress. A lot of that funding was through a program called the Superfund program. There was some funding that was provided through the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative to kind of get that cleanup over the hump. but it's a great example of how resources really are critical for making sure that our amazing, magnificent Great Lakes can continue to recover. Invasive species is another area of investment under the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. I am sure everybody in our meeting tonight has heard about Asian carp, specifically bighead carp and silver carp. Silver are known to be very irritated by the sounds of outboard engines, and two-stroke engines and many other kinds of motorboat engines. So as people are jet skiing along the Illinois River or other water that's infested with silver carp, they jump out of the water to get to be able to get away from those noises, those motor and those engine noises. And they've been known to break people's noses as they jump out of the water, and jet skiers run into airborne fish. So again, not just an environmental quality issue or challenge, but a public safety challenge. These fish are known to eat about 40% of their body weight daily in plankton. Plankton are the base of the food web out in the Great Lakes. And so when plankton start to disappear, as they have been because of other invasive species like the zebra mussel and the quagga mussel, it basically takes all of the other echelons of the food web with them above the plankton echelons. So it's really important that we tackle the problem of invasive species. The best way to keep invasive species from becoming a problem is to prevent them from ever getting in the first place, because once they're in, they're virtually impossible to extirpate. And once they're in, they create a lot of damage to the remainder of the food web. And for us in this region, we may not think about it, but there are a lot of iconic fish that we have in Lake Michigan and the rest of the Great Lakes. I grew up fishing off of Wilmette Pier for yellow perch, also called lake perch. Those populations have been whipsawing as a result of some of these dynamics. Whitefish, for those of you who are fans of Shaw's Crab House or what used to be the Davis Street Fish Market, you know that whitefish is something that we in this region love. And it also has been hit hard as invasive species like quagga mussels and zebra mussels. Basically, they're like underwater vacuum cleaners. They just suck plankton out of the system, which creates pressure in the food web so that those fish don't have what they would typically otherwise have to eat. You know, if you go to other parts of the country, like the Chesapeake, soft-shell crab are a part of that region's identity. If you go to the Pacific Northwest, salmon are part of that region's identity. Here in our region, it's whitefish and it's lake perch and it's yellow perch. They are part of our identity, even though we may not think about it that much. In the Chesapeake, when soft-shell crabs are under siege because of ecological change, people are outraged. I mean, they really are. In the Northwest, when dams went up and salmon were threatened, or when the Exxon Valdez spill took place and salmon were threatened in Alaska, people were outraged. Here in the Great Lakes region, when our whitefish and our yellow perch are under siege, it's not the same level of rage that we feel here. Maybe it's just because we're Midwesterners and we tend to be even keeled. But it's just the point that every region has its iconic species. For us, it's lake perch and it's whitefish, and they haven't been faring well because of these invasive species that have come in. And Asian carp, should they get in and become self-reproducing, bighead and silver in particular, it could spell another level of threat to the balance, the very delicate balance of nature we have in the Great Lakes. Polluted runoff is another one. I remember when I was working for the Obama administration, getting a call over a weekend in August of 2014, because the Toledo metro area's drinking water supply had to be shut down from toxic algae. Why was toxic algae showing up in Toledo's drinking water supply? There are a lot of reasons, but ultimately the source for the toxic algae was fertilizer, an excess of fertilizer upstream in agricultural lands, upstream in the Maumee River watershed that flows down through Toledo and into the western basin of Lake Erie. Well, when too much fertilizer is applied in agricultural areas, it doesn't just fertilize crops. The excess washes off of farm fields into streams, flows downstream and into the Great Lakes, where that excess nutrient, where those excess nutrients and basically fertilizer fertilizes plant life in the downstream watershed. Too much of a good thing. If you have excess fertilizer upstream, that translates into excess fertilizer downstream. That is not what you want to see. It can create conditions like, for example, something called hypoxia. Hypoxia is the absence of oxygen, and that's a bad thing for waterways. Fish need oxygen to breathe, even though we don't think of that, we all know it. And so if excess algae grows in a water body and it decays, that process of decaying sucks up oxygen in water such that it creates pockets of hypoxia, otherwise known as dead zones. The most famous dead zone we have is in the Gulf of Mexico. It's thousands of square miles in size. But we have also had dead zones, hypoxia, in Lake Erie. We've also had hypoxia in Green Bay. And my concern is that if we don't get a handle on polluted runoff, that is excess fertilizer washing off into our watersheds, we may start to see hypoxia in many other places, not just those. Habitat is another one. In the Midwest, we are surrounded by agricultural areas. And a lot of ways in which we had agricultural land in the first place was through the conversion of wetlands, that is filling wetlands, marshes, and turning that into agricultural land. If you ever drive north on 41, you can see the headwaters of the Des Plaines River, which used to be comprised largely of wetlands. A lot of that area was turned into agricultural land, and now, thanks to a lot of good efforts, even by some of us here in Evanston, like Don Hay, who some of you may know, those wetlands are now coming back very purposefully. But we've lost a lot of habitat around our upper Midwestern region, again, to agriculture, and the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative is trying to bring it back. Education and science, of course, really important to underpin all of our work across the board to help bring the Great Lakes back to life. You can't do any of that without education and science. We have to leave the next generation equipped to be able to make decisions, much like we've had to make decisions in our generation to help manage the Great Lakes. And I'll close this segment of the talk with this thought. You know, the Great Lakes are our homes, H-O-M-E-S, Huron, Ontario, Michigan, Erie, Superior. The Great Lakes are our homes. And much like we have to invest in our homes so that our homes will take care of us, we have to invest in the Great Lakes so that those homes, the Great Lakes, will continue to take care of us as well. This program helps do that. Fortunately, it has strong bipartisan support. I was very troubled at the onset of the Trump administration when the former president sought to zero out this program. Fortunately, Congress stepped in and would not have any of that. And so this program has continued to thrive. In fact, funding levels are looking to go up by about $25 million per year from its $300 million per year budget as we head into fiscal year 2026 in a few years. So not only has it been a really important funding source to help breathe new life into the Great Lakes, but I'm hopeful that with extra funding, we'll be able to do more good work around the region. I'll close off with this segment about the Chicago River system. Thanks to many of you, I'm serving as a commissioner at MWRD, and really the district has two missions. It has twin missions. One of them is to protect the drinking water quality for the Chicago region. That's of course Lake Michigan, and to do that, it needs to help protect water quality in the Chicago River system. The other mission is to reduce flooding. And it takes both of those missions very seriously. Water quality impairments largely come in the form of what are called combined sewer overflows, or CSOs, not to be mixed up with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. But when we have heavy rainfalls, our sewer system can get overwhelmed, which is why these flash thaws that I talked about earlier in the presentation can be so risky. We don't want combined sewer overflows. We don't want during heavy rainstorm for that relatively clean water from precipitation to mix with sewage and have to be discharged into the Chicago River system to relieve pressure. That creates problems. So MWRD is doing a lot of work to keep cutting back on combined sewer overflows. Something called the Tunnel and Reservoir Plan, TARP, or Deep Tunnel, as some of you may know it by, has been doing remarkable work in reducing combined sewer overflows over time. It has also helped reduce flooding. I remember growing up just north of here in Wilmette, when the North Shore Channel, the locks at Wilmette Harbor, the gates would have to be opened up probably a couple of times a year to relieve pressure from heavy rainstorms. For the past decade or so, those numbers have been going down. We haven't seen the locks and the gates have to be opened very often in order to relieve pressure in the system. Unfortunately, we are starting to see those gates and locks having to be opened more often. And that is largely a function of climate change. When we have these heavy rainstorms and these very wet springs that I talked about earlier, that water has to go somewhere, and those storms are becoming more intense. They're longer than they used to be, creating this new dynamic where the region has to cope with more water than it used to. It's also doing work to help restore habitat along the Chicago River system. One thing I'll let you, a secret I will let you in on, that's not much of a secret, but we aren't really talking too much about it until April, is some of you may be familiar with the work that's going on to cut down invasive trees and unsafe and dead trees along the North Shore Channel in the area of Isabella Street, which divides Wilmette from Evanston, and now south of Lincoln Street on the east side of the channel. We have just secured 150 saplings that will get delivered in mid-April as we head into Earth Day and Arbor Day. That will be able to be planted along the North Shore Channel. So there's a great deal of restoration work for habitat just in our own neighborhood using a great program that MWRD has called Restore the Canopy. I don't want to close this thumbnail sketch of the Chicago River system without also mentioning equity. Some of our neighborhoods in the Cook County area and the Chicago metro region flood more than others. Oftentimes, and unfortunately and sadly, those communities tend to be Black and brown communities. We have, over the past 2 years, started to change that by recognizing in MWRD ordinances the concept of disproportionately impacted areas, or DIAs. Communities that flood more frequently than others, again, often communities of color, will over time have the ability to get more funding to combat flooding than they otherwise would have had we not recognized the inequities of how we have dealt with flooding in this region. And, I'll close again with a thank you to all of you who have, helped me win election and then re-election this past November, because those are the kinds of things that I have been working on hard on your behalf at the district. So with that, I'll kind of close and take a breath, but leave you with some questions for discussion, and that may prompt some questions in return. Number one, what is our vision for the Illinois shoreline over the next 10, 25, 50, 100 years? We don't ask that question very often. We sure don't have a very good answer to it. We just know that when lake levels go up, there's a scramble to protect the shoreline. When lake levels go down, we get more beaches. We tend to be happy. But how are we viewing the shoreline? How are we viewing the lakefront from Chicago all the way up to Winthrop Harbor? And how should we be viewing it over the next century? Next question, how can we make the Great Lakes more resilient? And then how can we continue to accelerate the Chicago River system in terms of making it more resilient as well? So a lot of times speakers will just sit and wait and wait for questions to be asked. I thought I would beat you guys to the punch and ask my own questions of you. With that, I think my final slide, second to last slide, some resources here for anybody who is interested in learning more. These are great websites and books to consult. And then if anybody would like to be in touch with me, please do that. I'm giving you my GEI email address because I have the ability to check that more often. If you need to reach me, you can also follow me on Twitter at Aquabate. I picked that name because we need to activate for our water. It's important that we're not complacent. This picture was taken during Superstorm Sandy along the Diversey area of the Chicago lakefront. And it just goes to show you what climate change means to this region. Even though that superstorm was happening along the eastern seaboard at that time, this is the kind of impact it was having along the Chicago shoreline. 20 to 25 foot waves pounding our coast and creating these kinds of really breathtaking images. So with that, Joshua, I'm gonna take 5 seconds and try to get my vocal cords back before I lose them, but I'm looking forward to questions and answers.
Certainly. I'll give you a second, but I'm curious. I've heard, and unfortunately, I don't have any, references here, but I've heard conversation about Canadian runoff being a factor for the increasing lake levels. Is that something that you can speak to?
Sure. We do have 2 diversions of water in Canada that run into the Great Lakes. However, and those are through Ontario. However, we do have a diversion of water out of the Great Lakes. I'm just wondering if anybody wants to hazard a guess as to where that diversion out of the Great Lakes is.
St. Lawrence Seaway, is it somehow connected?
Well, you're correct that the St. Lawrence River does take the water from the Great Lakes and run it out to the Atlantic Ocean, but it's not a diversion. That's a natural waterway. A diversion is an artificial flow, something where people have essentially replumbed a system so that water goes one way instead of the other. Let's see if anybody has it. Ted and Anna win another $1 million from SEA. They both guessed the Chicago River, which flows into the Illinois River, which flows into the Mississippi, which then flows into the Gulf of Mexico. That's correct. The Chicago River system used to flow, for the most part, into Lake Michigan until the Water Reclamation District reversed the flow of the Chicago River, for the most part, to head into the Illinois, Mississippi, and then Gulf of Mexico. My point with that is, even though there are 2 diversions in Canada that flow into the Great Lakes, we also have a diversion right here in our backyards in the Chicago River that flows out of the Great Lakes. And basically that input and that output are a wash. So the reason we have high lake levels is not really because of those diversions from Canada. It really is because of precipitation and evaporation and the extremes in those cycles that we're seeing as a result of climate change.
Got it.
I do see a question here from Nick. What is my view on the use of revetments from an environmental perspective? Revetments are a form of shoreline protection. If you go downtown and particularly around Fullerton Avenue is a great example, you see what are called stepstone revetments. And that is because if you were to take a cross section of those revetments, you'd see them looking like a stairway. You have one level, and then another level, and then another level that essentially armors the lakefront and allows people to access the water. We also have in Evanston other forms of revetments. Some of the big limestone boulders that you see in Evanston are a form of revetments. That's called riprap. And that's a way to prevent the erosion of the lakefront, even though they're not in stair-step formation. What's my view on these? My view is that they're a necessary evil. But over time, I would dearly love to see our lakefront communities try to protect the shoreline in a way that's much more aesthetic. I'd also really like to see us innovate for shoreline protection. A lot of times what you see is steel or concrete poured along the lakefront, and that has the effect of sterilizing our coasts. That's not good. We want to bring ecological integrity back. We don't want to degrade it. I also understand that we have a lot of expensive real estate in our region that needs to be protected. And so that balancing act is really the name of the game. And that's in large part why I ask the vision question. Because as we move from year to year over the next 100 years, if we have opportunities to renaturalize our shoreline, it's actually the most cost-effective thing that we can do.
Speaking to that point about the vision for our shoreline, we've all watched as Chicago in particular has done some really amazing things with the Chicago riverfront. There's lots of plans to continue that kind of development up into further northern neighborhoods and perhaps elsewhere that I'm not aware of. Is there any concern from the Water Reclamation Board about expanding commercial development along the river and how that might affect it negatively, or is that not a concern?
Sure. Where MWRD tends to get involved in river development is when there are infrastructure questions. Some of you have heard about the development in Lincoln Yards. The Water Reclamation District has reviewed plans to make sure that those kinds of developments won't impair the water quality of the Chicago River system. But otherwise, the district does not tend to get involved in development questions, with one big exception. We just passed not long ago a watershed management ordinance. And one of the main things that ordinance does is it requires developers to hold rainwater on their properties. Think about it a little bit. If you develop a property, you put up a parking lot, you put up roofs, you have other hard surfaces on your development, that means that that water has to go somewhere. And that becomes somebody else's expensive problem to fix. So the watershed management ordinance is trying to turn that on its head and essentially take the approach that if you want to develop property, you have to be able to take care of that stormwater on your property. It's not fair that it becomes somebody else's problem. You just try to get rid of it and flood somebody else downstream. That's not fair. So that's one of the things that the watershed management ordinance does. And that is a really important policy tool for helping to deal with development along our Chicago area waterway system. It looks like Mary, hi Mary, asked the question, does MWRD ever hold open houses? Yes, it does. You can go to MWRD's water reclamation plants and get a tour. We have not been hosting those over the past year because of COVID, but we will be doing them again. And what I'd like to offer to all of you is if any of you would like to be notified about those open houses, please email me. And you can either email me at the email address that you see, or you can email me at davisc@mwrd.org. You can also visit the MWRD website, mwrd.org. Those open houses tend to be 1 or 2 times a year, often in mid-May. I have not heard yet whether we're going to be offering them this spring, but they're actually really cool. You wouldn't think touring a sewage treatment plant would be that cool, but it really is. In fact, about 3 years ago, I had to go to the open house at the O'Brien facility, which is at Howard and McCormick. And I asked my son, who was 11 at the time, and as we all know, young boys love really gross stuff, if he wanted to go with me. And he said, "Ew, gross. Yeah, I want to go." So they are really interesting. They're really eye-opening. And you see some of the kinds of innovations that are going on to help protect the Chicago River system right now, like the use of ultraviolet light to disinfect wastewater discharges into the North Shore Channel. Having grown up not far from the canal, as we always called it, it's just always been a place to avoid. That is starting to change. We're seeing people doing crew out on the channel. We're seeing people paddle kayaks and canoes out on the channel. And that's made it possible in large part because of the disinfection work, the innovative disinfection work that's taking place out of that O'Brien facility at Howard and McCormick. So Mary, thanks for asking that question. And then it looks like there's another one, Joshua, from Maureen Glosso, wondering what you know about the project north of Lee Street Beach. I actually don't know a ton about it. I first saw it about a month ago when I was walking by it, and it took me a little bit by surprise. I'm sure Evanston notified the public that it was going to do that with high lake levels. I know Evanston has had to scramble in order to help protect its shoreline more, and that project is connected to that. All right, and then somebody would like me to get rid of the presentation. So let me see if I know how to do that here real quick. How do I stop sharing?
I'd help you out if I knew.
Stop share, got it. All right, does that help? Is everybody able to see each other?
Yeah, that's great.
Good. Anyway, let me pause there.
Well, really appreciate you sharing your time with us this evening and your background. I actually didn't realize that you'd worked at the Obama administration on these issues. And I'm glad that we have your kind of expertise here in Cook County. I'm looking forward to going on one of those tours and seeing people in person again, hopefully maybe before the year is over. But thanks for joining us tonight.
Sounds good. Thank you, everybody. And please do be in touch if we can ever be helpful. And we'll make sure we get info to you about those open houses when they get up and running again.
Thanks everybody for joining us tonight.
Good night.